Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin, and she's Gini Dietrich, and I just demonstrated that once again, I don't know how to start a show, so I don't know, maybe I should put out an RFP to figure out how to
Maybe
do
you
this
should, because
correctly.
woo-wee.
Right after this.
That was
This
very
technology
loud.
thing just baffles me. I have a hard time figuring out which buttons to push. And
Oh man, that was funny. Whew. Yes.
so we're going to talk
Here we
about
are.
RFPs today.
Yes, we
It's
are.
something we've talked about before. I think most people know that, we kind of have a hold our nose approach at best to RFPs and often just, throw up the stop sign.
Mhm.
But this is based on a LinkedIn post that we saw recently by Perry Hedrick, who is the founder of Crackle PR. And so he talked about how his firm had just declined another RFP, in this case because they couldn't get an answer to the question, how many other agencies got this RFP? And they just got back a mealy mouth. Well, you look qualified. We thought it'd be great to hear from you, but we're
Oh,
not
for
going to give you that
heaven's sakes.
information. So, RFPs, Ginny. I think, so to me, the jumping off point here is that just because you get an RFP doesn't mean that you should say yes, certainly.
Right.
But it also doesn't mean that you have to say no. It means that you probably should ask some questions, both of yourself as well as the person offering the RFP. And if you don't get the kinds of answers that you're looking for, then you absolutely should walk away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's a really good LinkedIn post. And some of the comments were great too, because they talked about how important it is to have transparency and be open. So if you can't get simple answers like how many other agencies did you send this to, what kinds of things are you looking for, that kind of thing, then I think you should walk away, because you're flying into it blind, which is not what any of us want to do. And none of us want to waste our time or waste our team's time putting together a proposal that we don't have any idea if it's going to work just because we can't get the answers that we need.
Right, and a lot of times whoever puts out the RFP will try to steer this through a process. Well, submit your questions by this date, and we'll send out a master answer sheet. Personally, I think that's rubbish.
I think that's rubbish too.
I think if you cannot have a direct conversation with whoever's involved in making the decision on the RFP, not necessarily the ultimate decision maker, but at least someone who's in the process, there's absolutely no reason to go forward. And to me, it's even the timing is important too, right? And I think I've said this before. If you have a conversation with someone before the RFP comes out, right, at that point, the RFP is something that you should be much more willing to consider, because now you know more. They know more. There's some sort of relationship that's being established in some way, shape, or form. And so that, to me, would at least put it on the list of RFPs that you would consider. But if you just get something over the transom, if you cannot get a conversation, if you cannot get straight answers to the questions that you're submitting and get direct answers, not some convoluted FAQ type process, then walk away, and walk away fast.
Yeah, and I also think that companies, I mean, as we've talked about in recent weeks, I've gone through this process with a client, and the companies that are trying to send out 10, 15, 20 RFPs to that many agencies, nobody's going to be successful in that, because
Correct.
It's too many. And part of the reason they probably can't do conversations or answer questions is because they're trying to manage too many agencies at one time. So if you want to start with 20 as a corporation and whittle it down to 10, and then start to whittle it from there, so that you send it to, I wouldn't even send it to more than 3. But from an agency perspective, if you're hearing that they've sent it to 10, 15, 20 other agencies, it's like, for me, that's a no-brainer. Like, walk away.
Right. And for me, in this particular case, it's less that they won't give you the specific number and more that they just won't answer, right, in a meaningful way.
Right.
Because to me, the number matters, but only a little bit, because it's there are times where you can win an RFP easily if there are 20 people in there, because maybe they already know that they're going to pick you, right? So if I'm involved in that conversation before the RFP goes out, and I know that I've got the inside track, I don't care how many there are. And so So to me, this kind of a question is more of a proxy for understanding, how open they're going to be with you. I don't necessarily think that the answer itself has a whole lot of bearing on whether I would or would not reply to the RFP, because I can lose one with 3 participants just as easily as I can lose one with 20 if they've already pre-selected the winner, which is what happens in a lot of these cases. They already know
Yeah,
either who they're going to
sure.
pick, or it's down to 1 or 2 people already that they're already in conversations with. I mean, it's kind of rare that you're going to see a client go out and hire someone off of an RFP without any knowledge of them in advance. I mean, it does happen, but it's not particularly common. Generally, they have some knowledge of the agency before the process begins.
So to your point, in his LinkedIn post, he said, "How many other agencies got the RFP?" And they said, "We believe you will be pleased to know your firm was included on the basis of our research, industry referrals, and our estimation of your fit based on materials we read on your website."
Yeah. And we believe you're
And
full of you know what.
right, no,
Right. And a bunch of people have cheered this post appropriately so. But what we really need is more agencies to take this approach. More agencies
right,
need to say no to these crazy RFP processes. That's how you'll actually get change. That's how you will move on from this convoluted, stupid structure that doesn't produce good results for either the clients or their agencies. But as long as you have some people who are willing to play the game, it encourages clients, prospects, organizations to do this kind of thing. It's the same thing with terms, right? Payment terms. We can sit here and complain all we want about clients that want 120, 180-day payment terms, but guess what? A bunch of agencies are granting that. And as long as you've got some who are granting it, it's still going to happen. It's like
yep,
spam.
yep.
Right? Spam doesn't go out there because it doesn't work. It goes out because it works.
Right.
Enough people respond to the Nigerian prince that it's actually worthwhile for them to keep sending those
Oh
emails.
dear,
So
that's true.
don't be
That
the
is true.
sucker who falls for the Nigerian prince scam, also known as RFPs.
Well, there's the title of this podcast right there. The Nigerian Prince Scam, also known as RFPs.
I
You know,
wouldn't,
so,
and it's overly negative because I mean you can win RFPs, but it's so tied back to that conversation that you have at some point along the way, not after you've already put in tens or hundreds of hours of work, all sorts of creative thinking, produced these documents and presentations. If your first conversation is after you've done all of that, your odds of success are insanely
yeah,
low.
it's pretty low. Yeah, I agree with you. I will say though that there are some industries that require it, like regardless. Government is one of them. So if you're in the government world, you can't get out of responding to RFPs. But for the rest of us, follow
No,
these
you can't
rules.
get out of it, but you can decide not to play the game if you've never had a conversation with that person, right? Because even when it comes to things
Fair.
like
All right, that's fair. Yeah.
government or travel and tourism, places where you see education, in my experience, more often than not, you still have had a conversation with that agency, with that organization before they, really get seriously into the RFP process with you. And so if it really is just over the transom, your odds of success are so small, it's probably not worth the amount of time and money
Yeah.
that you need to invest to respond, because RFP processes are always more formal and more complicated than the typical pitch process that you have with a potential client where you're just going in and having conversations.
Yeah. So what about the RFP where you're the incumbent and either the client has to do procurement every 3 years and look at other agencies, or they've decided that maybe they like the shiny new penny and want to go after that, but you're the incumbent and you are invited to participate in that RFP process. How do you handle that?
Well, I mean, if you're the incumbent, you have to judge the relationship, right? I mean, if you believe that it is just a dog and pony show so that they can comply with their procurement policies, then of course you go ahead and you play the game because it makes sense. I mean, assuming that the work that you're doing is actually profitable, which I think is an
Right,
important
right.
caveat, because in my experience, a lot of times when agencies have this RFP driven work that they're the incumbent on, it's not the best for their bottom line. and it's probably only going to get worse through the RFP process. So you really have to be at a point where you've got a comfortable margin going into the RFP process. Otherwise, you may be better off just saying, thanks, but no thanks, we'll take a pass, which in and of itself is a forcing mechanism for the client. Because
Right.
if they really are just going through a dog and pony show, they'll probably say, hey, look, no, we don't misunderstand us. We still want to work with you. And so then then you need to still approach it from the standpoint of, I'm going to do what's right for my agency, and I'm going to price it appropriately going forward with everything that you've learned in the 1, 2, or 3 years that you've had the contract already.
Right. I will say that we just had this have happened to us. And I said to the client, listen, we'd love to continue to work with you, but as you know, we've spent lots more time and it would cost lots more money, and all of the things that you just said. So I think we're going to decline, and it's been really great, and we'd be happy to help you find a new agency. And they were like, wait, no, we don't want, no.
Right.
And then they started to realize that all of the time and resources that they had invested in
Exactly
bringing us up to speed and keeping us on as part of the team, and having to go through that process again, they realized it was going to be more expensive and more painful than they were willing to do. And so we came to an agreement there, but I don't think that we would have had I not said, gosh, this is going to cost you probably twice what you're paying, and we're just not interested.
Right. And I've seen that happen before in other cases, so, where the process magically changes as soon as it looks like they're going to lose you. And so
Right.
that might be, well, you don't really have to jump through all these hoops. We already know, so you can kind of skip sections 6, 8, and 11. You can just kind of do a pro forma response on this because we already know that we don't need you to do all of that. So they can make the process easier. They can make clear to you that they're willing to revisit scope in some fashion. There's all sorts of things that they can do as long as you're willing to say, no, I'm not going to play your game. And it's a powerful lesson for the value in saying no. If
Right.
you're willing to say no, if you're willing to lose business, to lose an employee, to lose a client, whatever, you're in a much stronger bargaining position and much more likely to get what you want out of that relationship.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think your point about making sure that we are all standing up for ourselves in this way is what's going to change it, and what's going to change it for the whole industry. So be adamant about it. And I know it's hard to tell people no, and I know it's hard to send an email that says, hey, thanks, this is awesome, but if we only have a 10% chance of winning, it's not something, we're not really going to participate. So being able to stand up for yourself, being able to stand up for your team, being able to stand up for what's best in your business, I think is what's going to change things for the industry.
Right. And I think, you can even look at it in terms of pure self-interest and not worry about the industry. Right, because it's always easier to act in self-interest.
Sure.
If you just sit down, and first of all, I would encourage all agencies to be tracking how much it costs them to respond to specific RFPs. And I think most agencies, if they actually did a proper accounting of the amount of staff time and other resources that go into producing the responses to these RFPs, I think they would be shocked at how much they are actually spending to not win business.
Right.
And if I went to you and I said to you, Ginny, will you spend $20,000 for the chance of winning a contract with Company X? You'd say, no. Pass,
right.
Thanks.
Right.
But that's effectively what you're doing, because staff time is not free.
Right.
And I think that unfortunately agencies look at it in terms of, well, I only had to, to buy, this much stock photo or video stuff, or
no, you're paying your
designer to
team
do this or whatever. You're paying your team. You're
Right.
paying yourself.
Right.
Your own time. In a small agency, the owner's time should be the most expensive. The time that you're spending is valuable, and you need to consider that when you're thinking about the amount of time it takes to respond to these things. And you really need to not look at it in terms of, oh, well, if I won this, it would be a great logo, and it would be a 6-figure account. It would be all of these wonderful things. Fantastic. That's lovely. Does that pay the bills? I don't think it does. And if you're only winning 10% of them, then you take if it's costing you $20,000 per, just for random numbers, that means your cost of winning RFPs is $200,000. So that means you have to subtract that from whatever profit you're making on the 1 out of 10 that you do win.
Right.
What do you think the chances are that's happening? Pretty small. Even the big agencies a lot of times aren't. A lot of times, and this is a dirty little secret, most people don't understand this. A lot of times the big agencies will win these big accounts because they don't care if they're making money off of them, because they're going to go make money somewhere else.
Yep.
And so they're happy with getting the trade press coverage that they're the agency of record for,
Yep.
insert Fortune 100 company here.
Yep.
If you're a small agency and you're running yourself profitably and properly, you can't have that kind of massive loss leader. It just doesn't work.
So one of the ways that I always coach clients through this is I say to them, okay, let's say that you do this RFP, but you're not going to do it using your team. You're going to do it using contractors, and you have to pay for their time. How much are you willing to invest in creating it and paying contractors to help you build it and pitch it? The answer is always zero. Always. Because as soon as you have to pay someone not on salary that you're used to paying, it becomes a different story. And so when they look at it from that perspective, almost everybody goes, oh, yeah. I mean, to your point, am I willing to spend $20,000 to win a client? No, of course not. But that's what it would cost.
Right. And it can easily get to be even more than that, depending on the specifics
Sure.
of the proposal that you're being asked to submit. Because, I mean, the thing is, when clients sit down and they write RFPs, it's like when you were a little kid and you started, building out your Christmas list. And I mean, when I was a kid, I used to go through like the service merchandise catalog or the Sears catalog. And I want this, and I want that, and I want this, and I want that.
Right.
And all of a sudden, it's a Christmas list of like, $50,000 in 1970s and 80s currency. And so that's what a lot of times people do when they put together the RFP. And so
that's a great analogy.
At what the total cost is. They're not looking at all of the work they would have to do in order to support you doing that work. And so with it being such a wish list, I mean, that sort of brings us back to the original point. You've got to be able to have conversations with the clients, with the prospects, even if it's an RFP process, because that's how you can really judge, what's actually important to this. What do they actually need? How does it fit into the whole picture? And you're never going to get that off of, that lengthy RFP and the FAQ that they put together. And, sometimes they'll do a Zoom for all of the different agencies that are involved so they can ask questions at once, but it's a stilted process and it's just a mess. So have conversations ideally before the RFP, but if not, at least once it's been put out. And if they're going to say no to that, then it's probably not a good fit for you, your agency, and your time.
Yeah. I think that this is, it's an interesting conundrum. I think as new agency owners, we all go through a process of, oh, I got this. I should do it, and quickly realize that even if your close rate is 20 or 30%, which is probably pretty high for an RFP that comes over the transom without a relationship, it's still not worth it. You still don't make the money back. You still spend way too much time and spend too much on resources to get it done. So I think you're right. If you're running your agency profitably and appropriately, it's going to be it's a really clear answer for you on how to handle it.
Yeah. And I mean, RFPs, they're sort of like a security blanket, right? It feels good to be responding to them because then you feel like you're doing something for business development. And it's so much easier to say, I'll spend time filling out this RFP as opposed to building a real relationship with a real person and a real prospect that would be an ideal client for you, right? Because you've got it in front of you and you can just kind of keep going through the checklist. And for a lot of people, that's just a calm, comforting feeling that you're doing that.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you can say, well, we responded to 7 RFPs last month.
Yeah.
Wow. That's impressive. How many did you win?
None.
Cool. I mean, that's great. I mean, if I played Major League Baseball, I could probably go up to the plate a lot of times. How many hits am I going to get? Not a single one, I guarantee you.
Not a single one.
Not one.
You might get one.
Not even if they try to bring me on as a replacement player this year and, they've got,
nothing
league guys on the mound.
You don't think so?
I don't think I would get a single hit. I might get a walk. I mean, I had a hard enough time getting hits in the Little League, let alone Major Leagues. So don't settle for that. Don't settle for just, saying, hey, I've had all these at-bats. Yeah. I know that psychologically it can feel good that you're not just sitting around doing nothing, but it's actually kind of worse than that because you're spending money or investing time and resources in something that is highly unlikely to be successful. So take some advice from Perry Hedrick and others, listen to us, ask questions, foster a conversation, and if that ends up hitting a brick wall, walk away.
Absolutely. Walk away.
And with that, we're going to walk away from this episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Jenny Dietrich.
And it depends.